Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight I want to take you somewhere different, somewhere a lot of people don't talk about, and honestly, somewhere a lot of people probably shouldn't go. The Navajo Nation spans parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. It's one of the most vast and remote stretches of land in the entire country. Beautiful in the daytime, red rocks, wide open sky, silence so deep it almost feels sacred. But when the sun goes down out there, that silence changes. It becomes something else, something that feels like it's listening to you. The Navajo people have lived on that land for centuries. They carry with them traditions, beliefs, and warnings that most outsiders brush off as superstition. But the three people whose stories I'm sharing tonight didn't brush them off, not after what happened to them. And the events surrounding a string of unexplained deaths in 1995 that were, for a long time, quietly buried, those events connect all three of these stories in a way that still gives me chills. These accounts were shared with me through different channels. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but the core of each story, what these people saw, heard, and experienced, that's been kept as close to the original accounts as possible. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Man Who Walked Wrong. So the first story comes from a guy I'll call Denny. Denny grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was 24 years old in the summer of 1995. He wasn't Navajo. He was from a white middle-class family, went to community college, worked at an auto parts store. He was, by his own description, about as ordinary as a person gets. That summer, his co-worker, a man I'll call Ray, invited him on a road trip. Ray had some family land out near the Navajo Nation border, close to a place I won't name specifically because the family asked me not to, but it was deep in the Four Corners region. Ray wanted to check on the property, maybe do some camping, be out there for about 4 or 5 days. Denny had nothing better going on, so he said yes. The drive out there was long. Hours and hours of highway that slowly turned into dirt roads, that slowly turned into trails that were barely trails at all. Denny said he kept watching the landscape change out the window and feeling this growing unease he couldn't explain. He described it as the kind of feeling you get right before a storm, that pressure in the air, that stillness, except there was no storm coming. The sky was perfectly clear. They set up camp just before sundown. Ray was comfortable out there. He'd been to this land before. He was relaxed, making food, joking around. Denny tried to match his energy, but something kept pulling at him. He felt watched. Not the casual feeling of maybe an animal out in the brush. This was heavier than that. This was like standing in a crowded room and knowing, without looking up, that one specific person is staring directly at you. He didn't say anything to Ray about it. He didn't want to seem weird. That first night was uneventful. They sat by the fire, talked, went to sleep. Denny said sleep came harder than usual. He kept waking up, not from sounds, just from this feeling, like something was pulling him out of unconsciousness. Every time he opened his eyes, the inside of the tent was dark and still, and Ray was asleep next to him, and everything looked completely fine, but it felt completely wrong. The second day they hiked around. Ray pointed out rock formations his grandfather used to talk about, showed him some old structures in the distance he said had been there for generations. It was actually a really good afternoon, and Denny said by the time they got back to camp, he'd mostly shaken that feeling from the night before. He was starting to enjoy himself. Then, around 9 or 10 that night, he stepped away from the fire to use the bathroom. He walked maybe 60, 70 feet out into the brush. It was dark, no moon that night, but he had a small flashlight. He He did what he needed to do and was turning back toward camp when his flashlight swept across something in the distance. A figure. Standing completely still, out in the scrub, maybe 150 feet away. Just standing there. Denny froze. His first thought was that it was another person, a hiker, a neighbor, someone who'd wandered close to their camp. He lifted his flashlight toward the figure, and it didn't move, didn't react to the light at all. He could see it was a person, or it looked like a person. It was tall, had the general shape of a man, but even at that distance, even in just that little circle of flashlight beam, something about the shape of it was wrong. Denny struggled for a long time to describe exactly what was wrong. He said the way it was standing was off, like someone who learned how to stand by watching other people stand but didn't quite get it right. The angles were slightly too sharp, the proportions felt stretched. He stood there for what felt like a full minute, just staring at it, and it didn't move, not even a little. No sway, no shift in weight, nothing. Just perfectly still, in the way that living things never are. He backed up slowly and went back to camp without taking his eyes off it until the darkness swallowed it from view. He told Ray what he'd seen. Ray's reaction scared him more than the figure itself. Ray went completely quiet. He stopped stirring the pot he'd been cooking. His face went flat, and then, very deliberately, he said, "Did it move while you were looking at it?" Denny said no. Ray nodded slowly and said, "Then don't look at it again. Don't go toward it, don't call out to it, and do not look at it again, whatever you do." Denny asked what it was. Ray just shook his head and said, "We shouldn't be talking about it out loud, not out here, not at night." He wouldn't say anything else. Denny barely slept that night. He lay in the tent listening to the desert and trying not to think about what was standing out there in the dark. At some point, deep into the night, he heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow, uneven footsteps, moving in a wide circle around our campsite. They weren't quiet. Whoever or whatever it was wasn't trying to sneak. It was just walking, circling, taking its time. Denny gripped Ray's arm. Ray was already awake. He was lying completely still, eyes open in the dark, and when Denny grabbed him, he slowly put a finger to his lips. "Don't make a sound." The footsteps circled them 3 times, then stopped. That was it. Just stopped. No retreating footsteps, no rustling of brush, no sound of something walking away. They just stopped. In the morning, Denny went outside and looked at the ground around the tent. He found tracks. They were human-shaped, barefoot, 2 feet, but they were wrong. The stride was too long, way too long, like something stretching its legs to their absolute limit with each single step. And the depth of the impressions was wrong too, way too deep for a normal person's weight. The front of the foot had sunk into the dirt almost a full inch, like whatever was making those prints was much heavier than it looked. Denny saw the tracks. He crouched down, looked at them for a long moment, then stood up and said, "Pack your stuff. We're leaving." Denny said, "You said we had 4 more days." Ray said, "Pack your stuff." They left within the hour. On the drive home, once they were back on a real road, once there were other cars around and the landscape was filling back in with signs of civilization, Denny brought it up again. Ray was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "There are things out there in that land that have been there for a long time, things that can wear a shape they're not supposed to wear. My grandfather warned me about them since I was little. He said they watch from a distance first, and if you show them fear, if you engage with them, they come closer." Denny asked what they were. Ray looked at him sideways and said, "I think you know what they are. I think you've heard the word." And Denny had. He'd heard it. He just didn't want to say it out loud. He still doesn't. Now here's the part that connects to 1995. About 3 weeks after Denny and Ray got back from that trip, Ray got a phone call from a cousin. There had been 2 deaths on land not far from where they'd camped. 2 men, brothers, who had been out there camping alone.
They were found by a search party after no one had heard from them for several days. The official cause of death was listed as exposure and dehydration, but the cousin told Ray that the brothers had been found in the middle of their campsite, not in their sleeping bags, not trying to walk for help, just in the middle of camp, like they'd lain down right where they were standing. One of them had his boots off. Both of them had their hands pressed flat to the ground, palms down, like they'd been kneeling before they fell. Nobody could explain it. Ray never spoke about that trip again after that phone call. As far as Denny knows, he never went back to that land.
Story 2. The Photographer. The second story comes from a woman I'll call Iris. Iris was a freelance photographer in 1995. She was 28, based out of Phoenix, and she had a contract with a small travel magazine to put together a photo series on the landscape and culture of the Southwest. It was a job she loved. She had a deep respect for the land and the communities she photographed, and by that point she'd already spent months traveling through Arizona and New Mexico. She was thoughtful, careful, not someone who went blundering into places she wasn't welcome. In September of 1995, she drove out to the eastern edge of the Navajo Nation to spend about a week shooting. She had permission to be in the area, had done her research, was careful not to photograph sacred sites without authorization. She took her work seriously. Her first few days out there were incredible. She got some of the best shots of her career. Mesa landscapes at golden hour, storm clouds rolling in over flat red earth, a roadside scene at dawn that she said looked like something out of a painting. She was sleeping in her SUV, moving from location to location. On her fourth day, she stopped to photograph an old structure she could see off the road in the distance. It looked like ruins, crumbling stone walls, the remains of what might have once been a building or a dwelling. She grabbed her camera and started walking toward it through the scrub. She was maybe 200 feet from the structure when she heard someone say, clearly and calmly, "You shouldn't go over there." She spun around. There was an older man standing about 30 feet behind her. Navajo man, maybe in his 60s or 70s, wearing worn jeans and a faded work shirt. She had no idea where he'd come from. There were no other cars on the road, no buildings nearby. He'd simply appeared. She introduced herself, explained she was a photographer for a travel magazine, apologized if she was somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. The man nodded. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't aggressive. He just looked at her the way someone looks at a person who is about to make a serious mistake, patient but firm. He said, "Those walls are old. The people who built them left a long time ago, but something else moved in. You take a photograph of that place, you bring a piece of it home with you." Iris thanked him, told him she'd stay away from the structure. He looked at her for a moment longer, nodded, and walked back toward the road. She watched him go. He didn't get into a car. He didn't go anywhere visible. He just walked, and before long she couldn't see him anymore. She went back to her SUV. She should have left it at that. But she's human. And she was curious, and she'd driven a long way to be out there. That night, sitting in the back of her SUV, scrolling through the day's photos, she found herself thinking about the structure, about what the light probably looked like on those stones in the early morning, about how the shot would look. She kept telling herself no, but the thought kept coming back, like it was being planted instead of naturally occurring. The next morning, before sunrise, she drove back to that spot on the road. She told herself she'd just take a few shots from a distance, from the road, nothing invasive, nothing disrespectful, just a landscape shot. She set up her tripod at the road's edge and shot the structure in the pre-dawn light. It looked incredible through the viewfinder, those crumbling stone walls against a dark purple sky, the shadows still deep and long. She took about 10 shots, told herself that was enough, packed up, and left. She developed the photos a week later back in Phoenix. They looked exactly the way she remembered. Perfect exposure, great composition, exactly what she'd hoped for. Except, in one of them, the fourth shot, there was someone standing inside the ruins. A figure, standing partially behind one of the crumbling stone walls, visible from the torso up. Tall,
looking in a direction that was hard to determine, not clearly at the camera, not clearly away from it, just there, inside a structure that had been completely empty when she stood at that road. She checked every shot. Before the fourth, empty. After the fourth, empty. Just that one frame with the figure in it. She told herself it was a hiker who wandered through, a local. It was the easiest explanation, and she tried hard to hold on to it. But the shape wouldn't let her. It was too tall, and the posture was wrong in a way she couldn't put into words, like something that had learned what stillness looks like from the outside, without understanding it from the inside. She put the photos in a drawer and tried to move on. 3 days later, she woke up at 2 a.m. to a sound outside her apartment, a slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the concrete walkway outside her building. She lived on the second floor, so it was the walkway right outside her front door. She lay still and listened. The dragging moved slowly past her window. Then it stopped directly in front of her door. Silence. She did not open the door. She lay awake until morning. When she finally opened the door in daylight, the hallway was empty, nothing disturbed. But there, on the concrete directly in front of her door, was a small pile of red dirt. Desert dirt, the exact color of the soil in the Four Corners region. She had no red dirt on her shoes, no potted plants, no bags from the trip that could have spilled, just that small rust-colored pile sitting there like it had been deliberately placed. She reached out to a Navajo cultural consultant she'd worked with previously through the magazine. She told him everything, the structure, the old man's warning, the photograph, the figure, the dirt. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he said, "The old man who warned you probably wasn't a person." She asked what he meant. He said, "Sometimes the land sends a warning, not always in a form you'd expect. You were warned, and you didn't listen, and now something knows where you live." He told her to destroy the photographs, not delete the digital files, physically burn or destroy the prints and negatives. He said certain things can anchor themselves to an image, especially photographs of places that carry long histories. He told her if the red dirt appeared again, to call him immediately. It appeared 2 nights later. He came to her apartment with an elder, and a ceremony was performed. Iris said she didn't understand everything that was done, but she said she felt the change in the room when it was finished. The heaviness that had been sitting on her apartment for days just lifted, like a window opening in a room that hadn't had fresh air in a long time. She destroyed the photographs. She never took a contract in that region again. But she said the thing that haunts her, even now, decades later, isn't the figure in the photo. It's the fact that in the days before the consultant came over, she kept feeling this overwhelming pull to go back, to drive back out there and photograph that structure up close, to walk right up to those walls and see what was inside. She described it as the strongest compulsion she'd ever felt in her life, like something was pulling on a hook that had been set somewhere deep inside her, and she didn't even know it was there until it started tugging. She still thinks about it sometimes. She just makes sure she never acts on it.
Story 3. What the Ranger Found. The third story is the one that took me the longest to decide to tell, partially because it connects directly to the official deaths recorded in that region in 1995, the ones I mentioned at the start of tonight's video, and partially because the person this story belongs to isn't around to tell it himself. This story comes from the personal notes and recorded conversations of a man I'll call Garrett. Garrett was a park ranger working in the region in 1995. He's the man who found the bodies. Not one set of bodies, 3. What's been publicly documented about the 1995 deaths in this area is minimal. A few brief news mentions, a short official report. Exposure, dehydration, misadventure. The standard language used when authorities find people dead in remote desert terrain and don't have a neat explanation. But Garrett's personal records, which were shared with me by a family member who believed the real story deserved to be heard, paint a completely different picture. Garrett had been working in that region for 6 years by 1995. He knew the land intimately. He was experienced, methodical, the kind of person who wrote thorough notes at the end of every patrol and kept every record organized. Not the type to spook easily, not given to imagination. His journals from before the summer of 1995 read like exactly what they are, the careful documentation of a professional man doing serious work in a demanding landscape. Then, in late July, his patrol took him to an area where a group of recreational hikers had failed to check in at a trail register. Standard procedure: go look for them, make sure they aren't lost or injured. He expected to find them a few miles off course, dehydrated and embarrassed. He found them, but not the way he expected. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s. They were in a flat, open stretch of desert with no shelter nearby, no terrain obstacle, no obvious reason why they would have stopped where they stopped. Their gear was intact, their tent was pitched properly, their water bottles were more than half full, their food was still in their packs. They were seated in a loose triangle around a cold fire pit. All 3 of them were dead. Garrett wrote in his notes that the first thing he noticed was their eyes. All 3 were open, and they were each looking in a completely different direction, not at each other, not at the trail, not toward the road. One was looking north, one was looking east, one was looking straight up at the sky. Like each of them, in their very last moments, had been focused on something that only they could see, something that had demanded their total and complete attention. The official cause of death was listed as dehydration and heat exposure. Garrett's notes make clear that he did not believe this. He wrote, "They had water. I checked the bottles myself. The physical signs I associate with serious dehydration deaths were not present. These people did not die of thirst. They looked frightened, not the way people look when they've suffered through something. The way they looked was like they had seen something that simply stopped their hearts." He noted something else. Around the perimeter of the campsite, in the loose desert soil, there were impressions. Not clean footprints, more like deep pressure marks, as though something very heavy had walked slow, wide circles around the camp. The stride distance was too long for a normal human being. The front of each impression was sunk considerably deeper than the heel. He had seen a pattern like this once before. Years earlier, on a night patrol, he'd found similar marks around an abandoned camp. He'd reported it to his supervisor at the time and been told it was probably a large animal, maybe a bear. He'd accepted that. He did not accept it this time. Garrett arranged a meeting with a Navajo elder he had developed a respectful working relationship with over his years in the region, a man who served as an advisory capacity to the Park Service on cultural and historical matters. I'll call this man Harold. Harold listened to Garrett describe the scene. He listened to the detail about the eyes, each person looking in a completely different direction. He listened to the description of the marks in the soil. When Garrett finished, Harold sat quietly for a moment. Then he said something that Garrett wrote down word for word in his notes because he wanted to make sure he got it exactly right. Harold said, "Those people each saw something different at the end. Whatever came to that camp showed each one of them something made just for them, something personal, something that used what it already knew about them. That's how it works. It doesn't frighten you with something random. It finds what lives deepest inside you, the thing you are most afraid of, and it wears that. It becomes that. And when a person's mind finally breaks under what they are seeing, the body follows close behind." Garrett asked him directly, "What is out there? What is doing this?" Harold looked at him and said, "You know we don't say that name out loud. Not out here, not where it might hear. But you know what I'm describing. You've heard the stories your whole career. You just chose not to believe them." Garrett wrote in his notes that night, in his own handwriting, "He's right. I have heard the stories. Every ranger who's worked this land for any length of time has heard them. I have been hearing them for 6 years. I never believed them. I believe them now." He filed his official report the following week. The report was, as he described privately, heavily sanitized. He did not include Harold's explanation.
He did not include his own doubts about cause of death. He wrote up the factual observations in the required format and submitted them. He understood what it would mean for his career and his credibility if he put down what he actually believed. But in his private notes, he kept going. He talked to Harold many more times over the following months. He started building a record, documenting locations throughout the region where similar incidents had been reported, going back decades. Unexplained deaths, people found in circumstances that made no logical sense. Campers and hikers who had reported, before disappearing, that they'd seen a figure watching from a distance, a figure that walked wrong, that circled camps at night. He mapped every incident he could verify or cross-reference against Harold's oral accounts. The pattern was unmistakable. The incidents clustered around specific areas, stretches of land where reports were dense and stretched back further than living memory. Harold's accounts referenced events passed down through generations from long before any Park Service existed. Places the Navajo people had known for a long time to avoid after dark. Places with names that translate roughly to things like where the walkers are and the watched ground. Garrett's map marks 11 such locations within 40 miles of the region. The 3 hikers he found in July 1995 had camped in the direct center of one of them. The 2 brothers, the ones Ray's cousin told him about, the ones Denny never forgot, their campsite fell within one of those 11 zones as well. And a third incident, a solo camper found dead under similar circumstances in October of that same year, was recovered from yet another one of those locations. 3 separate deaths, officially unrelated, in 3 different spots, all in the same calendar year, all with the same absence of logical explanation. Garrett left the Park Service in 1997. His family says the man who came home was not quite the same man who had driven out to that ranger post 6 years earlier. He had trouble sleeping. He became anxious in outdoor spaces after dark. He didn't talk about the land, didn't talk about the work, didn't respond well to questions about why he'd retired early. He spent much of the next several years continuing his research in private, reading, corresponding with historians and cultural scholars, maintaining contact with Harold. He died of a heart attack in 2003. He was 51 years old. His daughter found the research in a filing cabinet in his home office. Boxes of it, years of work. She said going through it was like reading the record of a man slowly coming to understand something he wasn't built to understand. His handwriting in the earlier journals is steady and clear. By the later entries, it's harder to read. Not from age, just from something else, some weight that had gotten into his hands. She let me read it because she wanted someone to know what her father had spent the last years of his life documenting. She said he never stopped believing it was important. He just couldn't find anyone willing to listen. The very last entry in his personal journal, written approximately 2 weeks before his heart attack, was different from everything that came before it. All the previous entries were meticulous, detailed, full of references and observations. This one was short, just 2 sentences. I went back out there last week. I needed to see it one more time. And then, below that, in handwriting that looks like it was written quickly, like it was written by someone who needed to get it down before the thought left them. I think it saw me too. I've sat with these 3 accounts for a long time. I went back and forth on whether to share them, how much to include, how much to leave out. The official record of those 1995 deaths hasn't changed. Exposure, dehydration, misadventure. That's the only version that exists in any document you could look up. There's no reopening of those cases, no new investigation. As far as the system is concerned, those people died from the elements. But Garrett's map is real. His daughter still has it. 11 locations, 40 miles, 3 deaths in 1 year, all inside those boundaries. Denny is still alive. Iris is still alive. They both remember what happened to them with perfect clarity. And all 3 accounts from 3 completely different people.
And all 3 accounts from 3 completely different people who never knew each other in 3 different situations described the same thing. Something that doesn't move right. Something that watches first and moves second. something that circles in the dark, something that doesn't scare you with something random. It finds the thing already living inside you, and it wears that. The Navajo have a name for it. Out of respect, I won't say it here, but I think most of you already know what I'm describing. You've heard the word. You've probably even said it out loud before, maybe around a campfire, maybe reading something online at 2 in the morning, treating it like a story. Denny doesn't treat it like a story. Iris doesn't treat it like a story. Garrett's daughter doesn't treat it like a story. And somewhere out in that dark, flat red desert, in one of 11 locations on a map that nobody in any official capacity has ever acknowledged, something is still out there, still watching from a distance, still waiting for the next person who sets up camp in the wrong place on the wrong night. Just standing there, standing completely still, in a way that is almost, but not quite, the way a person stands. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe out there.